New to Disney Plus is the documentary Beatles 64. Now, I'm a huge Beatles fan, so I was really excited to see this documentary and really curious to see if it would show me or tell me anything new, because I've been a fan to the degree and intensity for long enough that I've read many, many books, I've watched many documentaries, I've consumed everything I can. I've got a ton of bootlegs. So what is this thing going to show me that I've never seen before in examining? Basically, I'll tell you what it's about, and then I'll tell you the answer to that question. It's about an hour and a half. 90 to 120 minutes, not crazy long. It's not like the Peter Jackson Get Back documentary that was 8 hours and in my opinion could have been another 8 hours. This is very concise, and it talks about the Beatles coming to New York in 1964, when the Beatles first came to the US, their first US visit, as it were. It really gets into what's happening in the USA as far as 1964 is concerned. And it's them it's them on the plane, them arriving in New York, them in the hotel, them getting ready to do the Ed Sullivan Show, a little bit of the Ed Sullivan Show. I'm going to give you the whole story. And then just the mania going on around them. Basically, at the core of this, we have the footage that the Maysles brothers shot that was previously released as a documentary called What's Happening in the USA. And then later in I want to say it was early 90s, there's a home video release from MPI called The Beatles, The First US Visit. It's a lot of footage you've seen before if you know those. It's the footage looking, I think, better than you've ever seen it and sounding better than you've ever seen it. And I haven't read anything about this yet to see a breakdown of it. I feel like maybe there's footage in this that we haven't seen before. There's a lot of person on the street interviews with, like, what do you think about these kids going crazy? And interviews with the kids in the crowd who are outside the hotel screaming for the Beatles and scheming to try to find a way to get in to see them. And then it's a lot of time in hotel rooms with these four guys. The McCartney released a book of Beatles 64 photos called Eye of the Hurricane. And indeed, he is interviewed at that photo exhibit. I think it was somewhere in New York where they shot this, talking about that experience. And it really was like they were the eye of the hurricane. It was, not a ton was going on in that hotel room where they were. They were hiding from the furor and the mania outside, but outside was just chaos. And, how do these four young guys who have had good success in their native country, small native country in Europe, come to this huge country and find themselves just like a phenomenon that they can't quite understand? So it's interesting to watch them, their calm and their incredulity, if it will, at all the insanity and the nuttiness of Murray the K, barging his way into their world and sort of self-proclaiming himself the fifth Beatle and being around, and them liking this wacky, them growing up loving American media, American movies, American music, and coming to where it all started. Very much like if you're a huge Beatle fan and you want to go to Liverpool or go to England, it's just like this is where it all came from. And just taking it all in. You do get music. It's not like the old public domain releases and stuff like this where they cut all the music out. You see a bunch of the Washington, D.C. concert looking better than it's seen before, where they were performing in the round and Ringo is on this kind of shaky drum platform and they're just being consistently pelted with jelly beans because they had made the perhaps mistake of saying in an interview that they really like jelly beans, or jelly babies as they called them. And the American fans just would take them to concerts and just throw it at them like, you like jelly beans? Here, while you're playing that guitar, let me just hurl them at you. The increased resolution in this edition of this footage allows you to see every jelly bean that bounces off Ringo's cymbal or off their heads or off their guitars. It's fun to see the chaos and how huge they were. Not that many of us have forgotten about that, but it's great to hear the music. It's great to see something that utilizes the music and has the rights to it. And it intercuts that with interviews now with fans who were there at the time. You see writer Joe Queenan talking about what it meant to see them on Ed Sullivan and the effort he went through to see them on Ed Sullivan, and how it changed or reinforced his relationships, good and bad, with various family members. You see people, you get an interview with somebody who was in the crowd that day. You see old footage of them, and then you see them now. And it's a lot of these, senior citizen adults now talking about what it was like to be kids and what these guys made you feel, what the music was like. And they do set it in the context of Kennedy was president. He was fairly recently assassinated. And then this new sound comes out of England over the radio with, a couple of singles. And then they're on TV, and it just, a lot of people who lived through that said everything was different after that, for who they were, who they wanted to be, what the culture was like, what the pop culture was like. And you really get a great look at that. So for me, this was very cool, very enjoyable. it wasn't a lot that I hadn't seen before. So for me, it was pretty familiar because I knew that footage so well. When I saw it again, I remember what they said. I remember the looks they made. I remember Lennon doing like a proto version of the opening to Strawberry Fields Forever on a melodica while he's just sort of sitting in a New York hotel room waiting for, when they're going to go out and go to a nightclub. So the new footage is predominantly the interviews with the people who were there at the time. And you get a semi-recent, I guess with 10 years ago, interview with Ronnie Spector talking about hanging out with them in the hotel room and going out and going to like Harlem and where nobody knew who they were and just being able to be just people. That was interesting to me to see because when I looked at the end, I was looking for the credits where all the different footage came from. And the Ronnie Spector footage said credited Apple, I want to say 2014, Apple Corps. So I'm like, well, if Apple shot that, what did they shoot that for? Because it was way after the anthology. And there's a lot of, oh, by the way, there's a lot of interviews with the four Beatles themselves. You get vintage, obviously, Lennon interviews from long before, some of his Tom Snyder interview from 75, some of his radio interviews, other interviews that he had done. You get McCartney and Ringo interviews from recently, and also interviews with they and George from the anthology time. And that all looks phenomenal. It's all in the proper aspect ratio, which is nice. And I don't remember if that's stuff that was contained in the anthology or not. Obviously they shot way more interview footage than they used in that series, so it's always nice to see more. If you're a Beatle fan like me, they're other than Now and Then, which is arguable, they're not making new music, they're not creating new content, so it's all about finding stuff you've never seen before from the time when they were a going concern. And there's really a tremendous lot of it because they were so huge. And if you're in the bootleg world, you've seen a lot of it, but a lot of times it hasn't been with great quality. So when you can get a documentary like this that gives you a little bit more, gives you a little something newer. It utilizes the MAL technology, MAL, named after Mal Evans, who is their roadie. It utilizes the technology that Peter Jackson and Weta, I believe it was Weta or Wingnut Films or whatever, developed for the Get Back project, where they were able to really isolate sound in a cacophony. There'd be all kinds of people and noise going on, but they could go in and they could just pull out a conversation and drop out everything else. They utilized that in this documentary, so the dialogue is much easier to hear and understand than it was in previous versions of this footage. And the Washington, D.C. concert, which was something that was pretty widely bootlegged for a while. That was always like a budget tape you could find, or tape from collectors, or tape targeted at collectors. I remember my local video store had it, Beatles Live in Washington, D.C. It was one of those things that was out there. That sounds better than it ever has before. They were able to, tone down the jet engine sound of all those girls screaming to really get at the sound of the band playing, which nobody there on the day heard. You're hearing something that the people who literally were 10 feet away didn't hear on the day. So it's really well done. It's available only on Disney+. It probably will get a physical release eventually. I hope it does, because Get Back did, and that's such an important thing historically. And if you're a fan, that you don't want it to only be available on a streaming service that might one day go away, or might one day decide they don't want to have it there anymore, or legality or rights or tastes or whatever might remove it. Physical media is key and king to actually being able to watch something down the road, and for historians to be able to study, and to keep it out of the hands of bootleggers, who I'm sure already have pressed Blu-rays of this thing and are kicking them out. But available on Disney Plus to stream now. And if you sign up for Disney Plus, there's a lot of cool stuff on Disney Plus. There is other Beatle content. You can see finally a legitimate version of Let It Be on Disney Plus. You can see the Get Back documentary on Disney Plus. You can see, I want to say, the 8 Days a Week documentary, I think, is on Disney Plus, about the Beatles touring years that Ron Howard did. And now Beatles 64.